Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Ramani. Now, we get numerous questions from people who know that their narcissistic partner or that they themselves come from a family that feels like a really messy, abusive reality show. They're talking about double lives, triple lives, infidelity, addiction, verbal abuse, rage. The question that has come up repeatedly, though, is whether coming from chaos may somehow be genetic. And then the further question is whether narcissism itself is genetic. And then the fear that they're either going to justify this behavior in a partner that comes from this kind of a family system, or fearing that coming from this kind of family system means that you will become like this. So please drop a comment. What do you think? Do you think that coming from chaotic family systems just begets more narcissism? Do you think narcissism is genetic? Do you think everyone who comes from one of these family systems is doomed to become narcissistic? Now, people sometimes wonder if a person's family is like this, pure chaos and just lots of lies, deceit, you name it, doesn't it just follow that this is genetic? If a person's parent or parents or other family members are narcissistic, that these patterns might be observed in grandparents or aunts and uncles or siblings, then doesn't that just argue that all of this is genetic? We don't know, but probably not. A lot of what comprises narcissistic behavior and narcissistic beliefs is a byproduct of observation and learning and being immersed in behavioral patterns that may not be normative, but may be seen or observed in many family members in a particular family. Most people do what they see, or I shouldn't say most, many people do what they see, but not all of us do, thank goodness, right? The genetic evidence on psychopathy, that's a bit more convincing than what we see for other personality issues. But even in psychopathy, the thing that's being sort of genetically inherited isn't the psychopathy per se, but the ingredients of the psychopathy, the dysregulation, the impulsivity, perhaps the lack of empathy, perhaps issues related to mirror neurons. This is all an evolving field, but it's not like, ooh, there's a psychopathy gene, right? The genetic versus the environmental issues get mixed up again when we consider other co-occurring mental health and mental illness issues, patterns that we often see co-occur with narcissistic personality. So this could be things like the presence of mood disorders, such as depression and bipolar disorder and addiction. Now, those patterns, mood disorders and addiction, those have all been shown to be heritable. And when you have these parallel patterns, that they're parallel to personality issues like dysregulated behavior, impulsivity, variable empathy, and then other patterns like denial, problems with self-awareness. When you have this big mishmash of major mental illness and these personality issues, teasing all of this out becomes really, really difficult because there's just lots of chaos, right? So the really, really difficult and challenging piece, and this may apply to more than a few of you, is that you come from a family in which deviant, dysregulated, antagonistic, just plain chaotic patterns were happening all around you and harming you. And you didn't take that path, or your siblings didn't. You didn't end up making your own family that's chaotic and all of that, but instead you ended up as an empathic, productive, well-regulated adult. Though I will say that many people who originate from chaotic families, if they don't become chaotic themselves, they end up quite anxious as adults. Now, a narcissistic family system or a psychopathic family system sort of has its own weather, right? It has its own culture. This may look different in different families, right? In different families, we might see families where rules are regularly broken, even laws might be regularly broken. Oppositionality and just saying no is tolerated. Behaviors such as infidelity or lying are observed across multiple family members. Physical abuse or violence may occur regularly. Substance use is present in multiple family members. Domestic violence is observed. Manipulative, sort of ragey behavior is excused. These systems, these narcissistic family systems get to keep working because the people with the antagonistic patterns hold most of the power in the system, and for no other reason usually but fear. Some people walk on eggshells and others enable it, saying things like, well, families stick together, family is family, family loyalty, that sort of thing. Survival in these kinds of antagonistic family cultures often comes through escape, but also by building resilience in whatever way you can, going to therapy, setting boundaries. But family cultures like this often try to pull people back into them. And if you manage to escape and create a healthier life outside of that chaotic family system that you came from, then pulling you back through guilt is a very common play in these families, with family members, the enablers, and the narcissists asking for money or a place to stay, and that you somehow owe continuing to give to the family system. Another thing happens in antagonistic family systems. In many cases, there's basically nobody minding the store, meaning that children in the environment are not kept safe. That can be things like routines and schedules and expectations are lacking. And even if there is a kind person in this chaotic family system, they are often living in fear or trauma or stress, and they can't adequately caregive the children. And exposure to these environments can really disrupt attachment processes. In some cases, this chaos results in what are called traumatogenic or unsafe environments in which strangers or unsafe people who are part of the system are then able to easily enter into these environments, may even prey upon children in these environments again, because the chaos means that nobody is keeping an eye out for the vulnerable people in the system. And then, as you can imagine, some children at risk, because of being in that risky environment in their family, they may be more vulnerable to trauma even outside of the home and may not have someone monitoring their safety and accountability as they get older, middle school, adolescence, that kind of thing. These are children who may then be more vulnerable to engaging in experimental drug use, largely because it's probably happening in the family. They may run away, they may not do as well in school, they may act out in school. So the legacies created by these dysfunctional, abusive, narcissistic, antagonistic environments radiate outward and harm the people who are born into them. Sometimes these patterns replicate across generations. When we are exposed to anything, rage, dishonesty, betrayal, observing or experiencing various forms of abuse, substance use, some people become what's called habituated to it. What I'm basically saying is that basically people almost become accustomed to seeing these things and then may not even take as much notice of it when it happens in other places. It's almost like an acculturation process, right? For example, if they see this kind of behavior in relationships or workplaces, and there's a danger to getting habituated or accustomed to these patterns. Many people who are from ragey, abusive families have said, the yelling and the abuse was normative in my family. It wasn't okay, but it also meant that when I got into adulthood, I didn't notice that kind of ragey behavior as much when I entered other relationships. Yes, some people say they're more sensitive to it, but a lot of people say, I'm not noticing it as much. I was once chatting with a friend of mine, and she happened to be dating a ragey narcissist. I asked her as gently as I could, doesn't his yelling scare you? Because I got to tell you, it scared the hell out of me. And she said, I know he yells, but he isn't yelling at me. And I grew up with a father who was way more rageful and yelling. And I knew my dad loved me. And so yelling doesn't put me off. I thought it was actually a very interesting justification. I got to tell you, I still worry about her. I'd love to hear it from you. Drop a comment. Did you grow up with a narcissistic family member? And did the abuse in the family become so normative that you didn't notice it as much when it happened in other relationships? Keep in mind, for some of you, It might mean you notice it more. I'm somebody who does not do well. When somebody's yelling and screaming, I actually tend to sort of shake like a feather. Now, however, there's another side to this. Our nervous systems don't like yelling and fear and violence and anger happening around us, which is why in people who grew up in these systems, there is sort of a permanent eggshell walking. It's the hypervigilance and the hyperarousal that's observed in people who have long-term traumatic stress reactions. There's a sort of a jumpiness, a discomfort, an anxiety at saying and doing the wrong thing, and a tendency for self-blame. Even when a person is in a calm and safe environment, the hypervigilance and that sort of jitteriness persists. And in the world of narcissistic abuse, this can get this can get complicated in multiple ways. For people who may get into a relationship with someone who is narcissistically or psychopathically abusive in adulthood, and they come to find out that the toxic person they are in a relationship with came from one of these adverse and chaotic environments, the tendency is to want to save them, rescue them, help them, make justifications, not want to punish them for their difficult backstory. That's understandable. It's compassionate, it's empathic, and it often doesn't work. Sadly, we do need to make decisions about people on the basis of their behavior, their present behavior. You can't be the therapist to someone that you are in a relationship with. Justifying and waiting for change is more likely to result in more harm to you. If you came from a family like this and aren't like this, but still struggle with anxiety, attachment, and feeling not good enough, then you do often carry a greater vulnerability to trauma bonding and getting into a relationship that replicates these cycles again. Understanding these kinds of risk factors and your history is essential. That's why it's so important to pace relationships really slowly. Give yourself time to adjust, to get to know yourself, to value yourself. And then on top of that, self-compassion becomes absolutely essential. And finally, a point for everyone to remember. While our families obviously have in many ways shaped us developmentally, they don't define us. There are people who emerge from systems like this with some real core wounds and with rich empathic hearts. Simply being from a psychopathic or a narcissistic or a chaotic or an antagonistic family system absolutely does not mean that all hope is lost. We can't justify bad behavior in present time on the behalf of that family of origin issue, but we also can't, wouldn't reject people out of hand on this behalf. That history doesn't damn everyone. Adult behavior is the adult's responsibility. Our histories create vulnerabilities, but they are not excuses for bad behavior. So if this video resonated with you and you liked it, give it that thumbs up, and please don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you can keep up with our daily videos on narcissism, stay educated on narcissism, and all of the latest developments on narcissism and narcissistic abuse. Thanks again.